After signing a max contract over the offseason, Deandre Ayton is having the worst stretch of his career since his rookie season. His minutes, points, rebounds, blocks, and field goal percentage are all down, while his fouls and turnovers are up. He currently has a negative box plus minus and the worst PER and win shares rating of his career. When Ayton is on the court, the Phoenix Suns have an offensive rating of near 112, but that rises to 121 when he is off the court. Defensively, the Phoenix Suns are a better team without Deandre Ayton, as their defensive rating decreases by 4 points when DA steps off the court. With Ayton dropping off on nearly every stat and the Phoenix Suns becoming a better team without him, I expect Deandre is going to see some tough headlines for the next few weeks. Now, I have defended DA before, and even in this video I'm going to present the argument for defense, but his play and his drop off this season is apparent, and for many around the league, there is one question popping into everyone's minds. Did the Phoenix Suns make a mistake in re-signing Deandre Ayton? Now, I want to preface this by saying I am a Suns fan and I really do like DA. I have believed in him in the past and I have defended him in the past, and I'm going to continue to defend DA. Now, Phoenix had the opportunity to let him go over the offseason. The Pacers offered him a max contract, but with Ayton being a restricted free agent, Phoenix had the right to match the contract and chose to do so. This new max deal puts DA as the 38th highest paid player in the NBA, putting him in the same range as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Bam Adebayo, and Jason Tatum. Ayton clearly has not lived up to the level of these players, and his diminishing play is putting him in plenty of controversy. Let's start off by looking at Ayton specifically. Immediately, the most concerning issue with Ayton is the drop off at nearly everything he was typically great at. His skill set mostly considers of scoring closely around the rim, typically showing excellent touch. He has one of the better post games in the NBA, he's one of the better rebounders in the NBA, and while he's no Rudy Gobert defensively, he can hold his own and has typically been the anchor of an excellent defensive team, but he is struggling in nearly every aspect of this. Interestingly enough, he is shooting better in the paint this season than compared to last season. He is more efficient than usual from under the rim, and from 3 to 10 feet out he is shooting better as well, albeit at a much smaller rate than last season. However, his mid-range game, something he is typically great at, is staggering big time. Last season, from 10 to 16 feet, he was a 55% shooter, one of the best amongst all centers, but this year that is down to just 10% while shooting at the same rate. This is primarily the bulk of how Ayton's scoring has just dropped off. What is usually one of the best parts of his game has disappeared overnight. And while it goes against what the stats say, the eye tests show that Ayton still has lacked a lot of physicality, something he has struggled with over the course of his career. Ayton appears to not know that he is a freak of nature, and it seems like sometimes he settles for hook shots or a face-up jumper rather than being physically opposing down low. Now, typically he is pretty good at these shots, but when he is missing these shots, this lack of physicality is even more apparent. Of course, there's always the risk of an offensive foul when you just barrel into a lane, but as a Suns fan, I don't like seeing my star center settle for jumpers. Now, rebounding and defensively, I could not see much besides the fact that his stats were just down. His rebounds per game were down, and his rebound percentage is down 2 points from last year and 3 points from his career best. Something that is more concerning though is his defensive metrics. Now, advanced stats never tell the full story on defense, but they can certainly give us context clues and help us paint a picture. What is concerning for me is that Ayton has had a major drop off defensively. As I mentioned earlier, the Suns are quite literally a better defense when Ayton is on the bench. Ayton's defensive rating per 100 possessions is at its highest it's ever been since his rookie season, and with that, he is also fouling at a much higher rate than what he typically does. Now, I have been one to say that Ayton deserves more minutes. For his career, he has generally been an overall efficient player, and his career per 100 stats back that up. However, right now, per 100 possessions, Ayton is averaging 6 fouls, which is 2 more than what it was last season. Not only is that a weakness defensively, as players who are in foul trouble can't defend as well, but players with that many fouls just can't play as many minutes. Now, typically with defensive metrics, they can be influenced by a team. For example, a good defender can have a bad defensive rating if they're just on an overall bad defensive team. But in the case of Ayton, the exact opposite is happening. Phoenix is still a great defense. In fact, they are elite. At the time I make this, they are 4th in defensive rating and are giving up the fewest points per game. But they are doing this in spite of Deandre Ayton, not because of him. Like with the stats I mentioned earlier, Ayton's advanced metrics are awful. And while it's not a big surprise, Ayton's plus minus has been pretty bad. per 100 possessions, Ayton's plus minus at the moment is -14, which is 254th in the league. For reference, this is only counting about 285 players. On a bad team, I would expect this, but the Suns aren't a bad team. They're a top team in the Western Conference and one of, if not the favorites to make the NBA Finals. So like before, they are a good team in spite of Deandre Ayton's play. Now there are still some positive performances we have seen from Ayton. First off, some of his best games come against the Trailblazers and Warriors. The Trailblazers at this point I think are a legitimate team in the West, and the Warriors, being a bitter rival of Phoenix, while having a disappointing start to the season, are still the defending champs. Looking at some of their best 4-man combinations, Ayton is found in 4 of their 6 best 4-man lineups. And Ayton is also on one of the most efficient 5-man groups to play considerable minutes. But if you take a look at these lineups, there is also one consistency, and his name is Chris Paul, someone who is infamously known for, you know, making his teammates look much better than what they actually are. Combine Paul with Devin Booker, Booker being in the upper half when it comes to pure plus minus and the best shooting guard in the NBA. So yeah, it's not a surprise that the combination of Booker, Paul, and Ayton is still a pretty successful lineup. When we look at pairs though, that is when Ayton starts to struggle. His best duo obviously is with Chris Paul at a disappointing plus minus per 100 at just 3.7 points. Booker and Ayton are even less than that. So this is a lot of numbers to say one thing. Deandre Ayton is quite literally a negative when he has been on the floor, and his stats would likely look worse if he weren't already carried by one of the best backcourts in the NBA. DA has been hurting Phoenix, and the Suns are fortunate that he has not significantly affected their winning. He is a player on a maximum contract, a player who was the first overall pick just a few years ago. You should not be needing Chris Paul and Devin Booker to have a positive impact. And there's one thing that hurts Ayton's case even more. Meet Australian big man Jock Landale, the second-year center that has been doing everything Deandre Ayton isn't. Okay, that might be a bit harsh. Landale's stats may not pop off on paper, but he has done an excellent job replacing a highly effective JaVale McGee from last season. He, like Ayton, has been very efficient in the paint, but Landale has been massively underperforming when shooting the 3-ball. His 32% last season wasn't amazing, but it is far more forgivable than the 12% he has been shooting so far. However, this is a slump that he can eventually get out of. His individual stats are solid. I wouldn't go as far to call him a hidden gem yet, but he is no bench scrub. But what is really eye-popping with Landale is his overall efficiency when he is on the court, because the Suns' offense per 100 possessions is nearly 7 points better with Jock Landale. Defensively, they're nearly 8 points better with Landale on the court. Ayton's plus minus is at -14, while Jock Landale's is at 15, making him the 25th best in the NBA, over 200 spots better than Ayton, putting Landale on nearly the same level as Ja Morant. Now this is a number that can be inflated by garbage time, I'll admit that, but if you have watched a Suns game, there is a clear difference in the energy between Ayton and Landale, and Ayton is not the one who's being a spark. Now what if I told you Deandre Ayton is making 30 times more than Jock Landale? Now I have been incredibly critical of Ayton, and I think any Suns fan would have the right to be, but I do want to end this on a positive note because deep down I really do believe in Deandre Ayton. He can be one of the best role men in the league. There are a few star caliber players who can complete a lob like how Deandre can. When his face-up game is working, he can be near automatic and probably is on a similar level to like Joel Embiid. He has even shown flashes of being able to shoot the 3-ball. His attempts are low this season, but it is still double the rate compared to last year, and he is shooting around 38%. Defensively, we have seen what Ayton is capable of, and I think he can become a better defender than what we have seen at his current peak. And the last point to touch with Deandre Ayton is actually an issue that they had last season, something I talked about last season, and that is the fact that there is a huge discrepancy in his first versus second half play. Ayton on average plays roughly the same amount of minutes in the first and second half. In fact, he actually averages a whole minute more in the second than the first half. However, DA is scoring nearly 4 points per game less while having 1 less shot attempt in the second half. His rebounds and defensive totals remain the same, however his touches are significantly reduced. I literally made a video last season discussing the subject, and it is still something that is a major issue. Now there is an explanation for this, and that is on average, centers in the second half receive less touches than in the first. Unless you're Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid, most centers won't be scoring as much in the second as compared to in the first. But outside of that, there may be some causes on the Suns making this even worse. First off might be on Deandre Ayton himself for being more timid in the second half of games and being more likely to pass the ball to his teammates instead of risking missing a shot. Another issue may be the rest of the Suns players for not actually finding Ayton as often in the second half. While I wouldn't expect guys like Booker and Paul to just miss Ayton, Phoenix has had stretches of where they just don't let him touch the ball. Not to mention with Chris Paul being injured, Devin Booker is really the only serious playmaker in Phoenix right now. And another finger to point at might just be Monty Williams, someone who may not have the best relationship with Ayton. With Monty not calling the right plays in the second half, Ayton doesn't receive the ball, and maybe he doesn't put forth the same effort as before. Not saying that's justifiable, but that is a possible reason. Like I said, a center not getting shots in the second half is not unreasonable, but he just isn't any old center. He's a former #1 pick, a max contract player, and someone who is at worst a top 6 or 7 center in the NBA. A drop-off is expected, but one of this amount is concerning. I cannot deny the fact that Ayton does deserve some of the criticism he is facing. Unfortunately, this won't be the last time he hears it this season. But deep down, I am still rooting for Deandre Ayton. I want to see him make a return, prove his worth, and cement his name amongst the best centers in the NBA. I'm not calling to bench him as he is still a better player than Landale, and Ayton has earned his starting spot. I'm not saying Phoenix should look at trading him or just look at his contract as a wash or a burden on the team. But right now, the Suns have a Deandre Ayton problem, and with his backup playing incredibly well at 1/30th of the cost, Suns fans have the right to be disappointed in Deandre Ayton. And if he can't start to turn things around, the re-signing of Deandre Ayton may become a mistake.